They convinced themselves that nothing was wrong, that the problem existed somewhere outside themselves, in the demands of others, in the expectations that felt like chains. But when the noise stopped, when the pursuing ended, when silence replaced the familiar pattern of reach and retreat, something shifted. The avoidants stood alone with their defenses, and for the first time, those walls began to feel less like protection and more like a prison they had built with their own hands. The mirror they could no longer avoid. Silence operates as the ultimate mirror for the avoidant mind. Without someone chasing, without someone fighting for connection, without the external validation that their distance was justified by someone else's intensity, they face an uncomfortable truth. The patterns that once felt like self-preservation reveal themselves as self-sabotage. In the absence of reaction, the avoidant cannot blame their withdrawal on being overwhelmed. They cannot frame their emotional unavailability as a response to someone else's neediness. The silence removes every excuse, every rationalization, every narrative they constructed to justify their behavior. What remains is the raw reality of their choices and the emptiness those choices created. The mirror reflects not the person they left behind, but the person they have become through years of running from intimacy. This reflection carries a weight that no amount of dismissiveness can lighten. The collapse of convenient narratives. For so long, the avoidant thrived in a specific dynamic where their withdrawal was met with pursuit, their coldness answered with warmth, their absence filled with someone else's effort. This pattern allowed them to maintain a psychological equilibrium where they were never the villain in their own story. They were simply protecting themselves, maintaining boundaries, refusing to be controlled. But silence dismantles this carefully constructed narrative. When there is no one reaching out, no one demanding answers, no one desperately trying to fix what was broken, the avoidant loses their foil. The toxicity of their patterns becomes undeniable because there is no longer an external source to absorb the blame. They begin to recognize the destruction they cause not through accusation but through absence. The relationships they sabotage, the connections they poisoned with indifference, the people they discarded while convincing themselves it was mutual or necessary. The silence forces them to sit with the consequences of their emotional unavailability without the distraction of someone else's pain demanding their attention, the unbearable weight of self-confrontation. What terrifies the avoidant most is not abandonment, but accountability. Silence creates a space where they must confront the parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. The fear of vulnerability that masqueraded as strength. The inability to tolerate emotional depth that they reframed as independence. The pattern of devaluing others to protect their fragile sense of control. Without the background noise of someone fighting for them, these truths become deafening. They realize that their behavior was not about boundaries but about barriers, not about self-protection but about self-destruction. The toxic patterns they inflicted on others were reflections of the toxicity they harbored within themselves. And perhaps most painfully, they recognize that the silence they now endure is not punishment but the natural consequence of pushing away every person who dared to care. The avoidant finally sees what they could not see before, that their greatest fear was never losing someone else but discovering who they truly are beneath all the defenses. This revelation does not arrive with relief but with crushing weight. The understanding that they destroyed something real, something valuable, something irreplaceable. Not because it was flawed, but because they were too afraid to let it matter. The silence taught them what words never could, that emotional safety is not found in distance, but in the courage to remain present despite the discomfort. That true strength is not measured by how effectively one can detach, but by the willingness to stay connected even when every instinct screams to run.